The colony of Vera rested quietly beneath the silver mountains. The air was cool, filled with the gentle sound of flowing rivers and the distant calls of winged creatures in the sky. Humans had come to Vera many years ago, building villages. Beside the Orin, a race of tall and graceful humanoids who valued peace above all things. The two peoples lived side by side, sharing their skills. The Orin taught humans how to read the signs of the land, how to understand the forests and predict storms. In return, the humans shared machines, strong tools, and methods of defense. Together, they had created a life that seemed safe, calm, and lasting. The Orin lived in long wooden halls carved with patterns of stars, while the humans built stone houses with wide courtyards. Children from both peoples played in the open fields, chasing one another while their parents worked in harmony. The fields of grain swayed in the wind, and orchards stretched far toward the forests. It was a picture of peace, but peace can never last forever. One evening, as the red sun lowered behind the mountains, strange tremors shook the ground. At first, people thought it was only a small earthquake, but then it came again, stronger. Like heavy steps echoing through the earth, birds scattered from the trees, filling the sky in a black cloud. The river fish jumped wildly, as though fleeing something unseen. Even the wind seemed to hush. Leaving the colony in an eerie silence, the Orin elders gathered in the great hall. They whispered to one another in worried tones. Their faces, usually calm, were lined with fear. They remembered stories passed down through generations. The earth shaking, the silence of the forest, the flight of the birds. All these were signs of an old danger. Some said it was only myth, but the elders were not so sure. Laren, a young Orin, stood outside the hall, listening to the whispers of her people. She saw fear in their eyes, fear that she had never seen before. She turned her gaze toward the humans, who were repairing a water mill near the river. The humans worked calmly, even laughing at their own mistakes, as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, tremors were not a sign of danger, but only a shift in the ground. They did not see what the Orin saw. That night, as darkness spread across the colony, the humans and Orin gathered for their evening meal. Fires burned in the courtyards, filling the air with warmth. Yet the silence of the forest pressed against them like a shadow. No animal sounds came from beyond the trees. No owl hooted. No insect buzzed. It was unnatural. Rion, the human commander, noticed the unease among the Orin. He asked them why they were quiet, but they only looked at one another and gave no clear answer. At last, one of the oldest elders spoke. His voice was low, and his hands trembled as he lifted his cup. He said the tremors were not simple movements of the ground. They were warnings. He spoke of the beasts, creatures of great size and hunger, who once roamed the forests long ago. The stories claimed they had been driven away by forces lost in time. If they returned, no village would be safe. The humans listened, but many of them smiled in disbelief. They trusted their walls, their weapons, and their strength. To them, these beasts were only stories, shaped by fear and told to children. Brian did not smile, though. He had seen many worlds, and he knew every story carried a seed of truth. He advised his people to stay alert, to keep fires burning through the night, and to guard the walls. The Orin felt some comfort in his words. Though their hearts remained heavy, the night deepened. A thin mist crept from the forest, sliding across the fields and curling round the walls of the colony. Torches flickered, casting long shadows. Children were told to go inside, and the gates were closed. For hours, the colony was silent, with only the soft crackle of firewood. Then it came. A roar shook the air, a sound so deep it rattled every stone and every bone. The torches flickered out for a moment as if the air itself had been struck. The Orin cried out in shock, and the humans leapt to their weapons. Another roar followed, closer this time, carrying with it the scent of smoke and wild earth. The ground shook again, stronger than before. Laren clutched the arm of her friend, her golden eyes wide with terror. Rion stood tall, his hand gripping his blade. He looked to the forest where dark shapes moved among the trees, huge and slow. Like shadows given flesh, the air grew heavy. filled with the sound of branches snapping and soil tearing. In that moment, the colony understood the truth. The beasts were not stories, they were real, and they had come back. The calm of Vera was broken forever. The night of the first attack was one that no one in Vera would ever forget. The colony lay silent after the roars had shaken the ground. Every torch on the wall flickered as if the air itself was trembling. The humans lined up with their weapons, their eyes fixed on the dark forest. The Orin gathered behind the walls, some clutching spears though their hands shook. No one spoke. All waited. Then the forest moved. At first it seemed like only shadows shifting among the trees, but then heavy shapes stepped out, one after another. The beasts came into view under the torchlight. They were massive, taller than any man, with wide shoulders and thick hides that looked like stone. Their tusks curved outward, glinting in the firelight. Their glowing eyes burned with a hunger that chilled the heart. The Orin gasped in fear. Some dropped their spears and stepped back. They had heard the stories. But the sight before them was worse than anything their elders had described. The humans held their ground, though their faces were tense. Commander Rion raised his arm and gave the order to fire. The first line of rifles cracked through the air. Bright flashes cut the night, and the closest beast stumbled as bullets struck its hide. But it did not fall. It roared and charged forward, its heavy steps shaking the ground. Behind it, more beasts stormed from the forest, crashing through the trees like thunder. The humans reloaded and fired again. Some of the beasts slowed. Some staggered, but most pressed on, their thick hides too strong to break easily. The Orin cried out as the first of the beasts smashed into the colony wall. The wooden gates groaned under the impact. Dust and splinters rained down as the creatures slammed again and again. The wall shook, and fear spread through the crowd. Like fire. Hold the line, Rion shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. He rushed to the gates with a group of soldiers, driving long iron spikes into the ground to brace the walls. Flames from the torches shone on his determined face. Laren, standing among the Orin, could not look away. She saw the courage of the humans and felt ashamed of her own fear. She picked up a spear that another had dropped and took her place beside them. Her heart raced, but she refused to run. The beast struck again, and the gate burst open. With a crash, which shattered and the creatures poured into the colony. The humans fought with blades and fire, their rifles firing at close range, sparks lit the night as steel met tusk. The Orin screamed and fled toward the inner halls, though some turned and fought beside the humans. One beast lunged toward the houses, tearing through the wooden beams with its tusks. Another slammed its heavy body against the water mill, breaking it apart in a shower of stone and timber. The colony burned as fire spread from fallen torches. Rion faced one of the largest beasts at the center of the courtyard. His blade flashed. As he struck at its eyes, forcing it back, two other soldiers threw fire jars at its feet, the flames climbing across its thick hide. The beast roared in fury and crashed to the ground. The humans cheered, but their voices were drowned out by the cries of battle around them. Laren fought near the orchard, striking with her spear again and again. She was no warrior, but her heart burned with a new strength. She saw an Orin child trapped near a fallen wall and rushed to pull him free. Just as a beast charged past, the child ran into the arms of his mother, who wept in relief. Still, the beasts kept coming. For every one that fell, two more stormed through the gates. Their strength seemed endless. The Orin fell back in terror, but the humans held their ground, forming lines and driving the creatures away from the people. They fought with skill, each step measured, each strike precise. Hours passed like minutes in the chaos. By the time the first light of dawn touched the silver mountains, the ground was littered with broken walls, scattered weapons, and the bodies of beasts and men alike. Smoke rose into the sky, and the once peaceful colony stood in ruins. The surviving beasts gave one final roar before retreating into the forest. Their heavy forms vanished into the shadows, leaving silence behind. The air smelled of ash and blood. The Orin gathered in the courtyard, their faces pale with shock. They had never seen such destruction. Many wept for the dead, their voices soft in the morning air. The humans, though wounded and weary, stood tall. They had lost friends, but they had not lost hope. Rian looked around at the broken gates, the burned houses, and the frightened faces of the Orin. He knew this was only the beginning. The beasts had tested their strength, and they would come. Again Laren walked at his side, her hands still shaking, but her eyes filled with determination. She whispered that the Orin could not face this alone. They needed the humans. They needed their courage and their skill. Rian nodded. He already knew the truth. The peace of Vera had ended, and a new battle for survival had begun. The humans would not abandon their allies, no matter how great the storm ahead. The first attack had come and gone, but its shadow would remain forever. The sun rose over Vera, but its light did little to bring comfort. Smoke drifted in the air. Carrying the scent of burned wood and broken homes, the colony stood wounded. Walls had fallen. The gates lay shattered, and the fields were torn apart. By the weight of the beasts, the Orin walked among the ruins in silence, their golden eyes filled with sorrow. Mothers searched for their children. Families gathered their lost belongings, and elders wept softly for the many lives taken during the night. The humans moved with purpose. Though tired and injured, they began to rebuild the defenses. Rian walked among them, speaking with each group, his voice steady and strong. He carried himself with calm authority, even though his arm was wrapped in cloth from a deep cut. To him, showing fear now would only break the fragile hope that held everyone together. The Orin watched with quiet amazement. Where they saw despair, the humans saw work to be done. Where they thought of fleeing, the humans thought of standing. Laren stood near the ruined orchard, her spear still in hand. She could not forget the way the beasts had torn through her people's homes. Nor could she forget how the humans had fought with such strength and courage. She felt a fire inside her, one she had never known before. The Orin were a peaceful people, but peace alone would not protect them. They needed guidance, and she knew she could no longer remain silent. That afternoon, the Orin elders gathered in the great hall to speak of what should be done. The hall was dim, its carved walls cracked by the shaking of the beasts. The elders' voices were heavy with fear. Many suggested abandoning the villages and hiding in the mountain caves until the danger passed. Others wanted to send word to distant Orin settlements, pleading for help. Few believed they could resist another attack. Laren stepped into the hall, her head held high. She was not an elder, and many frowned at her presence. Still, she raised her voice and spoke. She told them of what she had seen, how the humans had stood firm when even the strongest Orin faltered. She reminded them that without the humans, the colony would have been lost in a single night. Her words carried weight because they were true. The elders listened, though some shifted uneasily. When she finished, Rian entered the hall. He did not bow or speak with fancy words. He stood tall and said plainly that the beasts would return, stronger and in greater numbers. Running would not save them. Hiding would only delay their deaths if they wanted to live. They had to fight back, and to fight back they needed to stand together. The elders whispered to one another. They had ruled with wisdom for many years, but never had they faced such a storm. In the end, fear pulled at them. But the sight of Laren and Rian standing side by side gave them pause. At last, the eldest among them admitted that the humans were right. To survive, they would need more than prayers and stories. They would need to learn the ways of war. Word spread quickly through the colony. Some Orin were unsure, afraid of taking up arms. But others felt the same fire that burned in Laren's heart. For the first time in generations, they prepared for battle. Humans began training them in small groups. They taught them how to hold their spears with steady hands, how to move in formation, how to set traps and build barricades. The Orin were not quick learners, but their desire to protect their families gave them strength. At night, the humans and Orin worked side by side, repairing walls and building towers for watchmen. Torches burned bright along the edges of the village. Children carried water and food to the workers, their small faces filled with determination. Fear was still there, but hope had taken root. Rian and Laren grew close in those days. They spoke often, sharing ideas and guiding the people. Together, Rian admired her courage to stand against her own elders, and Laren admired his steady will, which never bent under the weight of danger. Together, they formed the heart of the resistance. One evening, scouts returned from the forest. Their faces were pale, their bodies covered in dirt and scratches. They brought grim news. The beasts were gathering in the valleys beyond the trees, hundreds of them, more than the night before. They were not moving aimlessly. They were waiting, as if preparing for a larger attack. The colony fell silent at the news. Fear returned like a heavy wave, but this time it did not drown them. The people looked to Rian and Laren. Instead of despair, they found direction. Rian spoke to the humans, telling them to sharpen their weapons and keep watch on the walls. He ordered stronger traps to be set along the forest edges. Laren spoke to the Orin, urging them to remember their children, their homes, and the lives already lost. She told them the beasts could be defeated if they fought with courage, and her words lit a fire in their hearts. That night, as the stars filled the sky, the colony was no longer divided by fear and despair. Leaders had risen among them, and their voices gave strength to all. The people of Vera were no longer waiting for rescue. They were preparing to stand. The beasts would return, and the battle would be harder than before. But for the first time, the Orin believed they might endure. Humanity had shown them the path, and together they would face whatever darkness came from the forest. The colony of Vera no longer slept in silence. Every night, watchmen stood on the rebuilt walls, their torches glowing like stars against the darkness. The Orin and the humans worked together as never before. Spears were sharpened, rifles cleaned, and traps hidden along the forest edge. Still, the fear of the beast remained, pressing on every heart. Rian knew waiting behind walls would not be enough. The beasts were gathering in the valleys, their numbers too great. If the people only defended, they would be crushed when the full wave came. They needed to strike first. They needed to weaken the enemy before the next storm. Laren agreed, though she was not trained like the humans. She felt the same truth burning in her. She stood before her people and told them that hiding would not save their children. They must face the danger where it lived. Her words carried weight, and the Orin began to see themselves not as victims, but as defenders of their home. So the plan was set. Small teams of humans and Orin would enter the forest by night. They would set traps, burn the beasts' hunting grounds, and drive them away from the colony. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to survive. The first hunt began under a moonless sky. Rian led a group of 10, half human and half Orin. Laren walked at his side, her spear firm in her hand. They moved through the tall grass in silence, their footsteps muffled by the earth. The forest loomed ahead, dark and heavy with mist. Every branch creaked and rustle made hearts quicken, yet they pressed on. Inside the forest, the air was thick and damp. The smell of earth and rot clung to every breath. Strange cries echoed far away, the voices of unseen creatures. The team worked quickly, setting pits covered with branches and coating the ground with oil jars prepared by the humans. Torches would be used to light them at the right moment. Suddenly, a roar split the air. The ground shook as a beast charged through the trees. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and its tusks gleamed like pale knives. Panic threatened the group, but Rian shouted for them to hold steady. The humans fired, the flashes of their rifles lighting the forest. The beast stumbled but did not fall. Now Rian ordered. Laren thrust her torch into the oil at their feet. Flames burst upward, climbing the beast's hide. It shrieked in pain, thrashing wildly. The fire spread to the branches above, filling the forest with smoke and light. The trap worked. The beast fell with a heavy crash, its roars fading. Into silence, the Orin stared in awe. They had fought side by side with humans and won. For the first time, they felt the beasts were not unstoppable. Courage replaced fear in their hearts. But the forest was alive with more movement. Shapes shifted in the mist, heavy footsteps coming. Closer, the hunters fled through the smoke, leaving the burning pit behind. They returned to the colony by dawn, their faces blackened with soot but their spirits unbroken. The story of the hunt spread quickly. The Orin spoke of how humans had taught them to fight with fire and traps. Children whispered of the courage of Laren, who had stood with the humans and faced the beast head-on. Hope grew stronger. The hunts continued night after night. Each time humans and Orin worked together, they built barricades deep in the forest, forced the beasts into narrow paths, and struck from hidden places. Spears pierced where rifles had weakened. Flames lit the trees, and smoke drove the monsters away. Still, it was never easy. The beasts grew cunning. They attacked from unexpected sides, breaking traps and scattering hunters. Many lives were lost in the dark woods, yet the people of Vera no longer fought with fear alone. They fought with knowledge, with courage, and with unity. One evening, after a long battle that ended with 3 beasts slain near the river, Laren sat beside Rian at the edge of the camp. Her face was streaked with ash, her arms heavy with exhaustion, but her eyes shone with pride. She told him the Orin had changed. They were no longer the same people who once trembled at shadows. They had learned strength from the humans, and now they believed they could defend their home. Rian nodded. He was proud too, but his thoughts were darker. He had seen signs in the forest. The beasts were not moving without purpose. They gathered in lines, as though guided by some unseen will. He did not share this yet, for he did not want to crush the growing spirit of hope. But deep in his heart, he knew a greater danger was waiting. The great hunt had begun, and it had given the people of Vera courage. Yet the true test was still ahead. When the hunters returned that night, the Orin children greeted them with cheers, their voices ringing across the ruined village. Fires burned bright along the walls, and for the first time since the first attack, laughter was heard among the people. But beyond the forest's edge, unseen eyes watched. The beasts had not been defeated. They were waiting, gathering strength for the storm to come. The great hunts gave the people of Vera courage. But courage alone could not hide the unease that grew in the hearts of the humans and the Orin. The beasts still came in waves, and though many were slain, more returned each night. They did not wander blindly as wild animals should. They moved in groups, attacked with strange timing, and sometimes retreated as if following silent orders. Rian felt at first something guided them, something unseen. One morning, scouts brought news of an old ruin deep in the forest. It was once a temple of the Orin, long abandoned and half buried in vines. The beasts had been seen circling near it but never entering. The scouts feared it, but Rian decided it was worth investigating. If the temple held answers they needed to know, Laren agreed and volunteered to lead the Orin scouts with him. By dusk, a small group set out. Humans carried rifles, while the Orin brought spears and torches. They traveled in silence, stepping carefully through the thick woods. Strange markings appeared on the trees, symbols carved long ago that glowed faintly in the fading light. The Orin whispered that these were signs of the old stories, warnings left by their ancestors. At last, they reached the ruins. Tall stone pillars leaned against each other, cracked and covered in moss. The temple doors had fallen long ago, leaving only a dark entrance. The air around the place was heavy and cold, as if the forest itself held its breath. The group lit torches and stepped inside. The walls were carved with shapes that twisted like vines. Strange figures filled the stone, creatures with tusks and claws. At the center of the temple, they found a wide chamber with a single stone altar. Upon its surface lay more carvings, worn but still clear. Laren ran her hand across them, her face pale. "These are the beasts," she whispered. "Our ancestors wrote that they were once controlled by a master, not beasts alone, but weapons. They followed commands. They destroyed on orders." The humans exchanged uneasy looks. Rian stepped closer, studying the carvings. He saw the image of a tall figure raising its hand, while beasts bowed low before it. Above the figure were lines of strange light, as if power flowed from the earth itself. Laren's voice shook as she continued. "The stories told to us as children said this master was defeated. The temple was sealed, and the beast returned to the wild. But perhaps the master never truly died. Perhaps something has awakened it again." A low growl echoed through the hall, snapping their heads toward the entrance. Shadows shifted outside. The beasts had come. Rian gave the order to retreat. They rushed out into the forest, but the path was blocked by heavy shapes with glowing eyes. The hunters formed a circle, torches raised. The beasts growled, waiting, as if unwilling to strike too soon. It was not the way of wild animals. It was the patience of soldiers. The humans fired, and the beasts lunged. The night erupted in chaos. Spears struck, flames spread, and bullets cracked the air. The hunters fell, their cries lost in the clash, but the group fought fiercely, driving back the creatures with fire and steel. Smoke filled the trees, and at last the beasts retreated into the dark. Breathless and wounded, the survivors returned. To the colony, the news of the temple spread quickly. The Oran elders gathered again, their faces pale with dread. The legends they once called myths had proven true. The beasts were not acting on their own. Something ancient guided them, something hidden. Rion stood before the people and spoke with a voice that carried across the courtyard. He told them they faced more than wild beasts. They faced an enemy with purpose. He urged them to prepare not only for battle but for war. The Oran, though afraid, felt his words sink deep. The humans had never lied, and their commander had never faltered. Laren also spoke, reminding her people that they had already learned to fight beside humans. They had faced beasts in the forest and lived. If they could stand against creatures of such size, then they could stand against the hidden enemy as well. Her voice shook, but her courage gave strength to others. The Oran began to see themselves not only as survivors, but as warriors. That night, few slept. Fires burned along the walls as guards watched the forest edge. The children were told stories not of peace, but of bravery, of how their people would rise with the humans to protect their home. The elders prayed softly in their halls, but for the first time, their prayers were mixed with determination. Rion sat alone near the broken gate, his eyes on the dark trees. He remembered the carvings of the temple, the figure that once commanded the beasts. He knew the battle ahead would not be against mindless monsters, but against a will that sought to break them all. The hidden enemy had revealed itself in shadow and story. The next step would bring it into light. The people of Vera no longer wondered if the beasts were real. Now they wondered what Master called them, and how much time remained before that Master struck with full power. The days after the discovery of the hidden enemy were heavy with fear and urgency. Scouts returned again and again with the same news. The beasts were gathering in greater numbers than before. From the valleys to the far plains, they moved like a living storm. Hundreds, maybe thousands. No wall of wood or stone could hold such force. The colony had little time left. Commander Rion stood with his soldiers on the edge of the Silver Mountains, overlooking the valley below. His eyes followed the smoke trails rising in the distance where the beasts trampled the forests. He knew they would come soon, perhaps within days. If Vera was to survive, it would have to be here. In one final stand, he returned to the colony and called for every human and Oran able to fight. Men and women gathered in the courtyard. Their faces were tired, their bodies marked with wounds from past battles, but their eyes were steady. Rion raised his voice, telling them the truth. The beasts would not stop until nothing remained. There was no safe place to run. The mountains were steep, the forest already taken. Their only hope was to fight with everything they had. He promised that if they stood together, they could endure. Laren stepped forward beside him. She spoke to the Oran, reminding them of their children and their homes, of the nights when they had already proven their courage. She told them that the humans had come not as conquerors, but as allies, and now both peoples shared the same fate. Her words touched the Oran deeply, and their fear began to turn into resolve. Preparations began at once. The humans built a great line of defenses across the mountain pass that led into the colony. Spikes of sharpened wood were planted in rows. Traps of fire jars were buried in the soil. Pits were dug and covered with branches. The Oran worked beside them, carrying stones and wood, their strength adding to the walls. Children and elders brought food and water, their small hands carrying hope in every basket. Night after night, the torches burned along the defenses. The hunters who had once entered the forest now guarded the pass. They waited for the storm to break. It came with the rising of the red moon. The ground shook long before the beasts appeared. Their roars echoed through the valleys, growing louder, until the air itself trembled. Then they came, a wave of dark bodies crashing against the earth. Eyes glowing, tusks shining, they charged toward the colony with a fury that seemed endless. The defenders held their breath. Rion gave the order, and the first traps were lit. Flames burst across the ground, spreading fast through the oil jars. The beasts shrieked as fire licked their hides, but still they came, leaping over flames and smashing through the barricades. "Hold the line," Rion shouted. The rifles cracked, arrows flew, and spears thrust forward. The Orin fought with a strength they had never known before, shoulder to shoulder with the humans. They drove their weapons into the charging beasts. For every defender who fell, another step forward. The battle roared like thunder. Beasts slammed into the walls, breaking them apart with their massive bodies. Fire spread across the field, smoke rising into the night sky. The defenders coughed and fought on, their hands blistered, their eyes burning. Laren stood at the front, her spear flashing in the firelight. She struck again and again, her arms shaking but her heart unbroken. She saw fear in the eyes of her people, but she shouted for them to remember their children, to remember their land. Her voice carried across the field, giving courage where strength began to fail. Hours passed in a blur of fire and steel. The beasts pressed harder, their numbers endless, yet the defenders would not yield. The humans fought with every weapon, blades stained with sweat and soil. The Orin fought with a new spirit, their voices rising in cries of defiance. At the height of the battle, a massive beast broke through the lines, taller than any before. Its tusks glowed faintly as though touched by the same power that once ruled them. Panic swept the defenders, but Rion charged forward, with 3 soldiers beside him. He leapt onto the beast's back, striking with blade and fire. The creature roared and twisted, throwing men to the ground. Laren rushed forward, thrusting her spear deep into its side. Together, they brought it crashing down. The earth shook with its fall, and a cheer rose from the defenders. The tide began to turn. The beasts, once unstoppable, faltered before the unity of humans and Orin. The fires burned brighter, the traps claimed more of the enemy, and the defenders' courage grew stronger with every moment. Slowly, the endless wave began to break. When the first light of dawn touched the mountains, the battlefield was silent. The ground was littered with the fallen bodies of beasts and defenders alike. Smoke drifted upward, covering the valley in a gray haze. But the line had held. The colony still stood, exhausted and wounded. The survivors gathered at the broken barricades. They looked upon one another with pride and grief. They had lost much, but they had not lost all. For the first time since the beasts had returned, the Orin believed they could survive. Rion stood with his sword resting at his side, his face dark with ash. He looked toward the forest, knowing this battle was not the end. Somewhere beyond the trees, the hidden enemy still waited. Yet in his heart, he also knew that the people of Vera had proven themselves. The last stand of Vera was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of their strength. The morning after the great battle was filled with silence. The defenders of Vera stood among the ruins of the barricades. Smoke curled from the scorched ground, and broken weapons lay scattered across the valley. The beasts were gone, their bodies lying still in the ash. For the first time in many weeks, the colony could breathe without fear of another sudden attack. But the people knew the war was not finished. The hidden enemy who had awakened the beasts was still out there. The fire of victory burned in their hearts, yet the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on their minds. Commander Rion gathered the leaders of both humans and Orin in the council hall. The walls were cracked from the shaking of the battle, but the hall still stood. The air inside was tense, faces were tired, many marked with bandages. Yet every pair of eyes showed determination. Rion spoke with a clear voice. "We have won the battle," he said, "but not the war. The beasts came in greater numbers because someone guided them. We must find this enemy. If we wait, they will return with even more strength. The colony cannot survive another storm like this. We must strike first." There was silence until Elder Raoul, the oldest of the Orin, rose from his seat. His long gray hair fell to his shoulders, and his voice was steady though faint. "The humans came to us as strangers," he said, "but they fought as brothers. They stood where no one else would. I believe the time has come to follow their lead. If there is to be a strike, the Orin will stand with them." The hall filled with nods and voices of agreement. The humans and Orin, once uncertain allies, were now united. Plans were made quickly. Scouts would track the hidden enemy. Supplies would be gathered for a long march. Warriors would rest for only a short time, then rise again for one last mission. In the days that followed, the bond between humans and Orin grew stronger. They trained together, sharing their skills. The humans taught the Orin how to use fire jars and rifles. The Orin showed the humans the secret paths of the mountains and the old songs of courage. That gave them strength in battle. Children watched with wide eyes, learning that their future would not be lived in fear, but in unity. One evening, as the red sun sank behind the peaks, Laren walked beside Rion along the outer walls. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine. She looked at the commander and said, "When the beasts first came, we thought all was lost. Now I see that it was your people who gave us hope. You brought more than weapons. You brought belief. That is why we can fight again." Rion nodded. He was not one to speak many words, but he understood what she meant. The humans had proven something greater than their strength. They had proven they were able to stand firm even when all seemed lost. On the 7th day after the battle, the scouts returned. They carried news that froze the air in the hall, deep within the forests. Beyond the Silver River, there lay a fortress carved into the cliffs. From its towers, the enemy sent out calls that stirred the beasts. Strange fires burned at night, and drums echoed through the valleys. The hidden enemy was not a shadow, but a true force, and it was waiting. The council did not hesitate. The time to move had come. Warriors packed their weapons. Families prayed for their return. And the united host of humans and Orin began the march. The journey through the forest was long and dangerous. The air was thick, and every sound carried a threat. Yet the people did not waver. When small groups of beasts tried to block their path, they were struck down quickly. Where one side grew weary, the other side lifted them up. Step by step, they pressed forward. At last, they reached the Silver River. Across its dark waters stood the fortress. Its walls were high, and strange symbols glowed faintly on its stones. Fires burned within, and shadows moved across its battlements. The enemy had been waiting, confident that no one would dare to challenge them. But the humans in Orin had come. Rion raised his hand, and silence fell over the army. He spoke with a voice that carried across the river. "We are not here to bow," he said. "We are not here to hide. We are here to end this, together." A roar of voices answered him. Human and Orin together. The sound echoed through the trees, shaking the silence of the night. It was the sound of courage, the sound of unity, the sound of a people who refused to be broken. The battle that followed would decide everything. As the first arrows flew and the fires lit the sky, it was clear to all who stood there that humans had proven their worth. They were not strangers anymore. They were leaders, allies, and defenders of Vera. The war was not yet finished, but a new truth had already been written. Against fear, against darkness, against the endless tide of beasts. It was not only strength that won the day, it was unity. And it was the unyielding heart of humanity that had made it possible.